All right, good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for coming. This is the second talk in our four-part climate conversation series. And we're just so happy to see a full house again. It's really great that the community is really coming out and taking an interest in this topic because it's so important. So this project, Climate Conversations, has a few different components. One is this four-talk series. We have tonight's talk. We had one 2 weeks ago, and then there's one next Thursday and the Thursday after. Our community-led photo exhibit showing the effects of climate change locally here. Those are all photos submitted by community members. Some of them are pulled from a website called My Coast, which you can read about on the signs out there, which tracks the changes in the landscape due to climate change. And then another part of the project is a book display that we have out near our fiction department in the library. So if you just walk around the corner, you can see a lot of books related to climate change. Great books, and we put together a book list too online on the Climate Conversations website, which you can also access to do more research and more reading. Let's see. So this is really a community-led project where it's been put together by community members, built by community members, and you're here listening to it, and we hope you all take something away from it and get more involved in taking positive steps towards dealing with climate change. And I think you saw at the back when you came in, there was a mailing list you can sign up to. If you haven't done that, we encourage you to do that. You can hear about other events like this or other projects that will be happening in the future. So it'd be great if we could build off the momentum of what we started here. Let's see. So the one thing I do want to point out is that this whole project has been sponsored in part by the Friends of the North Kingstown Free Library. They've been really instrumental in putting this together, and they support a ton of library programming throughout the year. And anybody can join the Friends and help be a part of that fundraising group. And we encourage anybody to do that. And back at the table there's also information about how to become a friend. So you probably noticed there's a couple of cameras set up tonight, which is a little different than last time. Because we have such a big crowd and a lot of people who wanted to see these talks and weren't able to make it, we've decided to record them, and we're going to be posting them onto our YouTube page. And that link will be on our website. It is actually already on our homepage, and we'll try to send that out to you too to remind you to check it out there. So this talk and the next two talks will be recorded and posted. At the end of Jameson's talk, then there's going to be a question and answer session. If you do ask a question, we do want to film you if you're comfortable with that. So if anybody is not comfortable being filmed and has a question to ask, just let that be known, and we can edit you out of the video or just not put you on video. So that's something to be aware of. All right, so our talk tonight is called How the Natural World is Changing Around Us, and it is presented by Jameson Chace. Jameson, or Jim Chace, is a professor at Salve, Regina University, with joint appointments in the Department of Biology and Department of Cultural, Environmental, and Global Studies. His research has primarily focused on avian ecology, but with his students, he has examined a number of other environmental problems in the Newport area, including water quality issues, near-shore habitat change, and impacts on marine microinvertebrates, and sustainable agriculture. A native Rhode Islander, Jim received his bachelor's degree from Eastern Connecticut State University and master's and PhD from the University of Colorado. After a 4-year postdoctoral position at Villanova University, Jim returned to Rhode Island, moving to North Kingstown in 2005 with his wife Tara and their 2 daughters. Please welcome Jameson Chace.
Great. Thanks so much for inviting me to be part of this conversation, and thanks so much for the great turnout. I mean, it's just fabulous. We're talking about climate change, and we're filling this room, and it's got so much interest that the people want to see this video. So this is fabulous, right? That we're dealing with an issue, a global issue, and locally here in North Kingstown, we've taken a real invested interest in this, and we want to talk about it, right? So that's what we're here to do. And I want to thank the organization and the library for hosting this event. My title is pretty ambitious, and we don't have a lot of time to cover the entire changes in the natural world. So I'm going to keep it fairly short, hopefully to get some conversations started. I teach at a university, so usually when I get talking, it might go for 50 or 75 minutes, because that's what I do for my day job. So I'm going to try to keep it to like about 30, all right? And that should give us plenty of time for the discussion afterwards. I'm going to touch on a few things that are global in nature, but I'm also going to bring it right home to us here in North Kingstown, and I'm hopefully going to leave us with a couple of things that I think we can be thinking about and things that we can be doing besides just having conversations. You know, what are those next steps? And I'm sure in this audience you have other ideas beyond my own, and I think we can have a general open conversation at that point. So let's get rolling here. The first thing I want to start with is that if you're not aware, we're in this period of time of a global mass extinction where we're losing biodiversity at a rapid rate within our lifetimes. And this is proceeding at an unprecedented rate. And these data that are here were, if you're not familiar, these were published in 2019 by a group coming out of Cornell Lab of Ornithology, Cornell University, and looking across many years of data, going back almost 50 years, looking at citizen science data, looking at radar data from birds flying over the skies at night, looking at people, what they post on eBird, and a number of other sources to try and get a sense of what's going on with bird populations in the United States. And the telling tale of this is that across different habitats, across different groups, we're losing birds. In fact, we've lost almost 3 billion birds compared to 1970, meaning that when I was a child in the 1970s and I would go outside when I lived in Tiverton, Rhode Island, and I would listen to the bird song around me. If I were to walk out that same house today and listen to the birds around me, there's about 30% less song around us. That's been lost in my lifetime. And that's what we've lost across the United States. So we're talking about climate change. We have to add this backdrop of other things that are also going on. And climate change is just one more added pressure to a number of pressures that organisms around us are facing. And not to be outdone by a bunch of scientists in the United States, the folks in Europe decided to do the same study just shortly thereafter, and they found also alarming trends. Not quite as steep of a decline in Europe, and they didn't have quite as much time of a study going back to 1980, but they have also found precipitous declines in a number of birds, and overall a large decline up to about 20% of their birds in that area. So we're losing birds for a number of different reasons, and we're adding this issue of climate change, a rapidly changing climate, and these populations are already imperiled. And it goes beyond birds. And again, I'm an ornithologist. I study birds. This is where I tend to spend most of my time focusing. But birds, many birds eat insects, and so you would think, well, what do the insect ecologists, what do the insect biologists know about possible declines? And lo and behold, they have also studied this over long periods of time for a number of different organisms, and we've seen precipitous declines in some of the more charismatic and easy to follow of the insects, such things as butterflies. And the graph over on the left-hand side is from the World Wildlife Fund, which has for many, many years been tracking those wonderful Mexican overwintering sites for the monarch butterflies, where they try to estimate how many butterflies are on all those trees. And one thing we know is, for a number of different reasons, there's fewer monarch butterflies. And this is alarming, right? So we're seeing this decline of birds, we're seeing this decline of insects, and this goes certainly beyond just birds and insects, but it fits to all of our biodiversity. And we're not talking necessarily about that these species have gone extinct, right? Because they're still here, but we would call this biological decay, which is a predecessor to extinction. So here we have a situation where we're dealing with climate change. We're dealing with a rapidly warming climate that animals and plants have to adapt to or acclimate to, and at a rate that makes it very challenging. And they're already under increasing pressure. Now, closer to home, and I'm not a fisher person, but the fisher folks know this, that there's changing fish populations, and we can all of us can go to the Rhode Island DEM website, and we can go look at the landings data that's available. And so I've just pulled two together here. Very common fisheries, or have been common fisheries in Narragansett Bay, the winter flounder and the American lobster, and the landings, the numbers that we bring in have declined in our lifetimes. And so, what's one of the driving factors behind this? Well, it turns out that water temperature is really critical for many aquatic organisms. They're very sensitive to it. Their biochemical processes are very much tied to the temperature of the water in which they live. And for the flounder, the juvenile flounder, are very temperature sensitive. And David Taylor from Roger Williams University has done experimental studies looking at this, finding that these winter flounder juveniles will avoid the warm water conditions that we would find up in our estuaries. So what used to be great nursery habitat for our fisheries for Narragansett Bay no longer is such. That is a problem. American lobsters, the idea of the ubiquitous lobster for many of our New England dishes. In Rhode Island, at least in Narragansett Bay, those numbers have declined in terms of the landings. And again, lobsters are stressed at certain temperatures where they can't really be successful. They can't reproduce as well. The juvenile lobsters particularly are very restricted by water temperatures. And those water temperatures are the ones that we are at or approaching sometimes during our summer months. So that doesn't leave much for them to do except to either acclimate if they can. Adaptation is possible, but that takes generation time, and things are warming pretty fast, or they can move, if they can move. But what happens is the populations shift. We have really good data from a number of sites around Rhode Island. So just looking at temperature data, and this is right here in the West Passage of Narragansett Bay, going back to 1960. And what we have, and this is winter surface temperature, okay, so winter temperatures have increased several degrees Celsius in our lifetimes. So our surface temperature in the West Passage right here at home, we know this has warmed. So climate change is here. It's happening. These waters are warming. Fish, lobsters, they're responding to this. Other data from across Narragansett Bay, looking at the average temperatures and looking at what we call anomalies to that temperature, trying to deal with all the variation in those data. And what we see going back to 1985 up to near present is a warming of our waters across the entire year. So these fish, these lobsters that live in our waters, they're sensitive to temperature. The waters are warming, and their numbers are dropping. There could be many other reasons why they would be declining, but certainly the warming waters has to be one of them. And the fishermen, the commercial fishermen, certainly know this. As fisheries are moving north, such as the lobster, they're moving to deeper waters, or they're found more commonly in deeper waters than the shallow bay waters. And we also know many other fish species are coming into Narragansett Bay that haven't been here really before, which can be exciting if you're a fisher person, but it means you got to change what you're doing. But it is telling us, the animals are telling us that things are changing, right? And that's the message that they're leaving with us. That the climate has changed, it is changing, and they're shifting with that. And we adapt, or we have to find ways to change our behaviors in case of fishing, how we fish and what we fish and where we fish with that. But this is a sign of a changing climate. When people mostly think about climate change, and we talk about this on a global scale, we think about things like, right, the polar bear and the sea ice in the far north, and the lack of the sea ice and their inability to hunt for seals on the open ice, and then that's causing them to lose mass and maybe moving to more the rural, more urban settlements to then prey upon garbage or people or trash or dogs or whatever they can find because they can't get to the seals. Now, if you look at the data, if you go on the web, you'll certainly find stories about where some areas where polar bears are increasing and other areas where they haven't changed, and certainly some where they've declined. But on the whole, on the average, their numbers are declining. And again, we know that the sea ice in the far north is moving. And why I'm bringing this up here in North Kingstown is because there's an interesting corollary that I'll come to, that the polar bears have nowhere to go, right? I mean, there's no further north that they can go. There's no place where it's cooler that they can get to. The lobsters have shifted north. Polar bears don't have more north to go. So they're out of options, right, in a changing climate, a warming climate. We don't hear much about seabirds and penguins and what they're dealing with on a global scale, but the folks who study those know that they too are in decline. And there's a number of reasons for this, of course, and it's not just climate change. But one thing we know about with climate change is with these shifting fisheries, the prey upon which they feed is going to move, and it has moved. And that means that birds that return to the same place year after year and lay their eggs and then forage at sea for days before returning back to their rookeries to then feed their young who are developing on land have to fly further and further to get to those fish. Further bouts of foraging, longer bouts away from the nest, returning with the energy that they burned to do that means that they're leaving less food for their young, and fewer young survive, or they have fewer young in their lifetime, and the numbers decline. And there's a number of reasons why these decline, but these birds often have been returning to the same places year after year. And in many places, we have protected some of those rookeries, some of these colony sites where all these birds come to. We've developed the other ones, right? We say, well, they always come here, so let's protect this island where they always nest in large numbers. And but now with the shifting food, they don't have an opportunity to shift their colony sites. There's no other place to go. The only thing they can do is fly further and further to get their food, and this has a direct impact on their prey. And this is what we might refer to in some ways as a phenomenological mismatch. That is, birds and other animals will time key aspects of their movements, their migrations, their breeding time period when the food is most available, right? So take a bird right here in North Kingstown like this wood thrush, which will nest in our wooded areas in our backyards, and you can hear their flute-like song in the spring and through the early part of the summer, and they build their nests. Well, they're timing their nesting ideally so that when the young become fledged from the nest and are foraging on their own, there is an abundance of leaf insects for them to eat. And if they don't have that, the young, as the adults feed the young, won't grow as well, they won't fledge as many young, and when the young leave the nest and try to gain mass before they fly south, as they are right now, to their wintering grounds, they won't have as much of a fat stores. So this climate warming and the changing of the timing as to when we have leaf out and when the insects are available and how many insects are available is mismatched with birds that are coming from a place far away, timing what has always worked and now is not working so well. The lower graph, which if you can see, is a great a study that was done in England with a bird that's similar to the chickadees called the great tit. And these have been studied very extensively in terms of their food and when they get their food to feed their young. And that's one of the classic studies where they found this phenomenological mismatch, where as the climate has warmed, the food is not available for the young, and they have fewer young in their nest boxes now than they did years ago, because these have been studied for year after year in some parts of Europe. So this idea that, yes, the birds are still here, the insects are still here, but now the timing is off. I'll take you to another place far away. If you've ever had the opportunity to climb the high Rocky Mountains up into the Alpine zone, you would find this most wonderful animal, the pika, which is actually related to rabbits. It's relatively small, maybe the size of a large hamster. And these animals do not hibernate. They store under the rocky crevices flowers they've gathered all year, all summer. Like they make hay piles. And then they feed on the hay all through the winter to then be jumping around on the talus slopes in the summer. Obviously, with climate change and changing of the flowering times, we're concerned about animals on the mountaintops like the pika. And this map down below shows Rocky Mountain National Park in Colorado. The map on the left, A, is where they're currently found today. With the climate change models, maps B and C are what's predicted in Rocky Mountain National Park for the pika. They have nowhere, there's no more up. They can't go higher, right? Climate change is coming, vegetation is shifting up in elevation, and the food they feed on and the habitats they live on, that's at its limit. They will disappear on those mountaintops eventually, and it's coming relatively soon. And this is a tragic story taking place in the Rocky Mountains. Closer to home, similar story, you may not be familiar with a wonderful bird called the Bicknell's thrush. The Bicknell's thrush, like the wood thrush, but it breeds on the mountaintops only in the Green Mountains, some of the White Mountains, and in part of the Adirondacks, and a little bit up into the Maritime provinces, up on the tops of those mountains. And I've done some work on this bird with my colleagues in Vermont. I've had a chance to be on Mount Mansfield studying them. And they have a very limited range and very few numbers globally. This is the only place where they're found. Those orange areas on the map, that's the breeding range. And that's the only place they're found in the world, on these mountaintops. And with the possible 1.5 to maybe 2, maybe more than 2 degree climate shift, we're expecting that these Bicknell's thrush are going to disappear. They're not just going to move north. You'd say, well, why can't they just go further north, right, with the climate? Well, if they go further north, they run into a more lower elevation subspecies called the gray-cheeked thrush. They're very closely related. They will interbreed, and they will be outbred by the gray-cheeked thrush, and the Bicknell's thrush will disappear, is the prediction. So this mountaintop idea that they have no place to go, there's no more up for the Bicknell's thrush, is like the pika, it's like the polar bear, they have no place to go with an impending climate change. Bring it closer to home. Right in our backyard, the salt marsh sparrow, probably a bird you have not seen. Maybe you've heard it. It's a very secretive bird, and it only occurs in a very small range of the eastern seaboard, which is shown on this map, and you can probably barely see it because it only covers a very thin line of our coastal salt marshes in New England and down into parts of the mid-Atlantic states. And this has been studied extensively. And one of the challenges of this bird breeding in a salt marsh is that we have sea level rise. The habitat that they're in will disappear because the sea level is coming, and their vegetation they rely to be in is going to be underwater. What's going to happen? Now, folks have been studying this very, very closely, all up and down the East Coast. So we know what's going on here. And in order to try to reverse this trend of what's going to be declining salt marsh sparrows, we have to do things. If you can see that box over there on the left-hand side, there is requiring wetland habitat restoration, right? That's going to take a tremendous amount of work and money. We have to find ways to make marshes move upland, elevate our marshes, give them a place to migrate to, give habitat for these birds to move up with this incoming sea level. These nests, and I'll show you a picture in a minute, these nests become inundated when the tide waters come in on the moon tides. we have to find ways, or we can find ways to try to reduce that flooding of their nest sites. Not an easy task. These birds are essentially trapped between the sea and our urban development or coastal development, which won't allow for the migration of these marshes. So here's the lunar cycle with what happens with our salt marsh sparrows. They arrive from their just southern United States wintering grounds, and they set up their territories and build their nests right after the peak high tide following a full moon. Okay? And at that point, all of the tides are lower. So all that very short period of time of build the nest, lay the eggs, incubate the eggs, hatch the young, and get the chicks out of the nest before the next full moon's high tide, because that will flood the nest. And in fact, there are some tides, like at the new moon, where actually the water will come up and flood the underside of the nest, and it will get wet for a period of an hour or so, and then the water will recede. And they can survive that, but they can't survive it later in the season. So this idea that if they are staying in the salt marsh and the sea level is rising even a couple of inches, right, they're not going to be able to nest successfully, and they have no other place to go. There's no place for our marshes to escape to if we haven't left habitat for those marshes to move upland. And so these birds are trapped literally between the sea and urban areas. And the sea level is rising. We know this right here in Newport. We've been monitoring the sea level rise since 1930. And we've got almost about an average of about 10 inches of sea level rise during this time period. So the water has been rising, it is rising, and it will continue to rise into the future as the planet warms. Our coastal organisms are on that cusp of that edge. They are our polar bears, right? They are our pika that are on the mountaintops. They're right in our backyard, and this is what's happening. Now, most of this sea level rise has been relatively gradual, right? But we also know, if you've been paying attention to the Thwaites Glacier, or the Doomsday Glacier it's often called, which is holding back the West Antarctic ice sheet like a dam, and the expectation is that this is going to lose its mooring on the bottom of the continent in West Antarctica and go out to sea. And when that does, all that ice that's behind it is going to move out into the ocean and begin to melt pretty rapidly. They expect that by 2030 that will have broken free, and then that ice sheet is going to begin to move. If just the glacier itself were to melt, there's somewhere on the order of feet of sea level rise, and that will come relatively fast compared to what we've seen in the past. And as the rest of West Antarctica continues to melt behind it, that's just going to be adding more sea level. So not only do these animals not have a lot of space to move upland, we don't have a lot of time to help them or get those marshes to migrate. This really needs to be a priority for those of us who live in the ocean state, and we have coastal wetlands right here. Because what have we done? We love the ocean. We live near the ocean, right? We build near the ocean. We build as close as we can, and sometimes we build too close to the ocean, right? That doesn't leave the ocean and the habitats between the sea and the land any chance to move. So we have to really be thinking about where that can happen and allowing that to happen, and honestly funding that to happen. And it's not just the salt marsh sparrows. There are many, many species that inhabit our wetlands, our coastal wetlands, our salt marshes, our beach areas, that rely on these for breeding or for year-round habitat, nurseries for so many of our fisheries, and we haven't given it a place to migrate to move to. And so that's I think, a major piece of our story when we think about climate change and how nature is changing right here in our backyard. These organisms, and many of them we probably don't spend a lot of time seeing because they're fairly secretive and they hide in the marshes. But these organisms are really the bellwether of climate change, and these are our polar bears. These are our seabirds These are our Bicknell's thrush, and this is our backyard. So I really wanted to leave this with going beyond the conversation, because talking about these things is fabulous, and getting an understanding and sharing our information and our passions is important, but I think we also think about what we can do. And I think when I think about what we can do here in North Kingstown, the first thing that comes to mind is getting behind and supporting the many, many different kinds of climate mitigation strategies that we have going forward. And certainly right here at home, we talk about wind energy, we talk about solar energy, getting away from fossil fuels. That has to be a conversation we keep having and we keep supporting. And there's many more things we can do individually. There's things that we can do at home. There's things we can do with our municipalities. But I think, the big issue, like when we plug in this computer and turn on these lights, right? What's powering this? And right now it's about 50% natural gas, right? We're going to hope that in a few years that's going to all we can say this is all wind and solar. That's the direction we need to be going in. I'm on the board of the Audubon Society of Rhode Island, and I've served on the board of the Aquidneck Land Trust. I'm very involved in local habitat conservation, and so I can really say to you, I think we really need to support, wherever we have the opportunity, habitat protection. We have to give these organisms the opportunity to acclimate and to be able to adapt to a changing climate. In order to do so, they have to have the largest populations possible. And they have to have the most different habitats which they could potentially move to in the future. Whether we talk about trees or flowers or bats or birds or dragonflies, they need habitat. So I implore all of us to do what we can to support our local land trusts and our land conservation groups. And North Kingstown has done a great job of this, and we just got a recent large purchase with the Audubon Society of Rhode Island, which is fabulous, and we can do a lot more. But these are important things for all of the organisms that share the planet with us. And then finally, just keeping the common organisms common. We don't really want to get in a situation where things become so rare that then we're really spending a lot of effort and time and money trying to save what's left. Let's keep the common things common. And so when I think about birds especially, what are the things that come to mind? It has to be that so many birds die from colliding with windows. And part of that is right now during the migration when birds are flying, mostly at night, our nighttime lights, right? Keeping those lights down is really important. Some people love their cats. I used to have cats when I was a child, and if we keep our cats indoors, we can protect billions of lives of animals that would otherwise might be eaten. So that's really an important stewardship responsibility for all the cat owners who are out there. Many of us have backyards, and we have opportunities to choose what gets planted. Many of us get involved in local organizations that have property that choose plantings and choose natives, right? Choose the native organisms that can inhabit these areas so that the animals have opportunities to use those habitats as well. That our backyards also become wildlife habitat if we're doing a good job. And then because of those insect declines and how many other organisms really depend upon the insects, we have to move away from pesticides as much as we possibly can to try to protect the biodiversity that we have. So with that, I'm going to stop talking and hopefully open up the conversation. I think I hit 30 minutes on the dot, so that's pretty good. And we'll stop there. Yes.
Thank you for that. It was really compelling to hear all those good examples of how so many populations are being affected by climate change, which in our time, of course, is so much driven by the extreme dominance of the human species. I'm interested to hear what you think about that impact in an evolutionary sense, where most of us are familiar with the example of the dinosaurs, which were also an extremely important and effective keystone species that control how everything else was able to survive or not survive, or shift or change their feeding habits or whatever. But overall, in an evolutionary sense, what we've seen over great periods of time is that there are a lot of long-term shifts that, when one species runs out of food because of climate factors, over time there are adjustments made and it all balances out, as long as there's not one super dominant keystone species like humans or dinosaurs that control it to such a degree. So just wondering your thoughts on how that long-term sort of equalization process, how much time do we have to wait for that equalization to happen to all these threatened populations you're talking about?
Right. No, it's a great question to put it in the perspective of hundreds of millions of years, right? So, first of all, there's been 5 mass extinctions in the past, right? And the most recent one was an asteroid that pummeled into the Earth 65 million years ago and really wiped out most of the dominant life forms in a very short period of time. Here in 2024, we are the asteroid, right? We are the asteroid that is impacting the Earth. We consume more than half of the world's entire net primary productivity. We use up more than, and that leaves less than half for all the other organisms that inhabit the planet. People often say, save the Earth, right? Save the Earth is kind of a phrase, and that's a great phrase. I can guarantee you that life in Earth will exist in the future. One way or another, life will persist, and it'll certainly persist without us. But what kind of life do we want to have in our lifetimes, right? And what's our responsibility when we are the asteroid, and when we're causing the climate change? We're putting the animals and plants under all the stress. We're causing this evolutionary change. We don't have to do that, right? We can make a choice and not do those things. So it seems to me that the compelling answer is to not be the evolutionary force that drives the loss of so many species. Let's be the evolutionary force that allows for life to persist. And other things will happen. Life will go on. Evolution will change organisms over time. But once you've lost so many threads of life, it's hard for it to maintain itself going forward. It'll be very, very different. Let's not have history reflect back on us and say, here in this lifetime, we threw up our hands and said, evolution will take its course. I would say, let's be a positive force for change and not a negative one.
One thing is, I agree with most of what you say. I'm a geologist, and I take a very long-term view of things. Don't forget that in the year 1000, Greenland was called Greenland because the Vikings used to they used to farm there. And they were driven out by climate change. So climate change is something which has always existed. It's not something which is happening. Now, we as humans are making things worse. I've seen in the Pacific, some of these Chinese fishing fleets, the huge machines, and they just wipe out the habitat. So there are things which we as humans can do and should do. That I agree with you. But don't forget there is an overriding natural cycle of climate changes which are nature-driven, not driven by humans.
No, I agree with you. And 2 of the most important classes that I took as a graduate student were vertebrate paleontology, and giving me a perspective, as my geologist professor used to say, the best thing for a biologist is to get some geologic time into their knowledge. And so I appreciate that. Yes, if we went back 15,000 years ago, we'd be sitting under a block of ice, right? This area was scraped bare, right? We go back 100,000 years ago, where the same thing had happened prior to that. And that warming period that you speak of, that you know of, certainly was a warming period of a few degrees, less than a degree of Celsius warming. We're talking about going up to about 2 degrees warming. So we're adding it at a rate that we haven't seen in the past. So yes, some warming will be beneficial to humans in some places, and certainly detrimental in others. But given that the pressures you're talking about in the China Sea with the fishing that's going on and the pressure we put so many species under, and then we add this aspect of a rapid human-caused climate change on top of the natural cycle that's already existing, I think we are pushing the accelerator on a evolutionary change, loss of species, that we don't need to be doing. That we can back that off. But yeah, I appreciate the long-term perspective.
I don't want to belabor the point, but the thing is we do have cores of ice cores in Greenland and also in Antarctica of the last million years. And when you look at these cores, which are very long cores, there's periods when there's only ice. But you see also evidence of periods when there's forest in Greenland. So the thing is the climate has changed. So it's nothing to do with humans. It's just natural driven climate. I don't disagree with you that we're doing a whole bunch of things which are wrong. But maybe we can do a little bit more like the people in Venice did. They adapted to the condition there and built a city.
Oh, I absolutely agree with you. We are going to have to find ways to if we can't mitigate our way out of this, which we probably can't, we're going to have to adapt. And I think we have to help other organisms also adapt to this changing climate because it's happening so rapidly.
Now, when it comes to the windmills, our problem with the windmills is how many birds do these windmills kill? Bats. I mean, if you keep this thing rotating at night, you're going to be killing something. I've got no problem with solar panels. One problem where you're going to store the electricity. That's technology that can be solved. But these windmills are for animals, those are dangerous.
Well, I agree that they certainly could be, and in some places they have been. But these particular wind turbines and the siting of these wind turbines where they're putting them, they've been studied as best as possible with the information that we have from surveys out at sea on ships, counting seabirds, looking at where birds fly, how high they fly off the ocean, trying to find ways to do the least harm possible. Will there be some harm? Potentially. But how many million homes do we have built in Rhode Island that have never had any study done before they were built? The habitat was removed, the house was built, the windows are there, the lights are on. In our own backyards, there's more studies on the wind turbine to try to reduce those kind of effects, which is great, than we've seen in many other parts of any sort of development that we have. So I think that as far as we can use the best available science to site the wind turbines in a way that will have the least amount of impact, and putting observers out as these are being developed so that they can watch for impacts on whales, is the best that we can do. But given the overarching concern of a changing climate, and this is being a way to mitigate, it seems that might be a trade-off we have to make, or we are making. But yes, I agree. Wind turbines could certainly be killing birds and bats, and they have done that in some places. Yes?
In terms of thinking of educating younger generations, do you think it's more important to share climate mitigation strategies, or is it like trying to turn the Titanic and it's something we can't fix at this point and it's more important to teach adaptation and how to support the species? Or can we fix this at this point, or can we just deal with what's coming?
I'm sort of a hopeless optimist, so I like to think that we can solve problems, especially when you get a room full of people who are interested in solving problems or learning about problems and then wanting to solve them. I think with young people, we don't want to add too much fear to their lives about gloom and doom of the future. But I also think we want to give them the idea that when you see a problem, you can come up with a solution, and that I think builds resiliency in young people and adults. So I think the mitigation piece is important. Like, why are wind turbines going up? Why are solar panels important? Why are we buying an electric car or whatever we happen to be doing? And I'm sure that the education they're getting in school, they'll probably come home and ask parents to do the same sorts of things. As it often goes, the younger generation will want to lead and solve the problem of the generation before them. But I also think at the same time we have to think about, what we're doing in terms of protecting habitats and why that's important for a variety of different reasons, and why we're interested in salt marsh restoration, or maybe why we can't go walk on a beach because there are birds that are nesting there. These are important lessons that we can teach every day. Yeah, in the back.
When you extrapolate out the data, what does Wickford realistically look like in 50 and 100 years when sea level rise?
I don't have that with me, but if you were here 2 weeks ago, you would have seen these amazing maps. That was incredible. And there are some great... that
presentation is on the Climate Conversations website.
Yeah, and there's some great resources to go to on that. It's we have some work to do. And if you go outside and look at the pictures out there, you can see we are already behind. I'm going to go in the front, and then I'll go to the back. Yeah.
Well, I'm an entomologist by training, work for the Natural History Survey and their rare species data clerk. And I can tell you right now, to the educational aspect of it, as an entomologist, looking at our yards, number one right down there, if you stop using pesticides tomorrow, period, maybe if you have to get rid of a hornet nest by the back door, but stopping using pesticides is huge. The damage they do, they alter the soil chemistry, wiping out different microbial communities, making it harder for your plants to grow. They wipe out your decomposers, they wipe out, so I'd say, and then habitat, when we're looking at what you can do as an individual, I'm a huge native plant person, the clear answer to me is that by planting native plants in your yard, you can make a huge difference in an extraordinarily short time in terms of that ability for your yard to take care of, like you're saying, keep the common birds common. Like I always said as a bird watcher, you got to see a lot of chickadees to see a yellow warbler. Okay, that's just the truth, and that's the way it is. In my yard, I moved into Potawatomi 8 years ago. On average, I study syrphids, which are hoverflies. I would have maybe 4 or 5 species in a summer. I've collected more than 17 species just this year. So that they aren't there by accident. They're there because the host plants on which they breed, feed, and live are in that yard now. So I can guarantee it. You do that. Go over to Prickly Edge, if you've heard of them, or down to Blue Moon Perennials off of Saugatucket. Start planting native plants. And the number of plants you need to plant to start making a difference, and then I'll shut up, is 1.
That's great. Thank you. All right, excellent. There's a question in the back. Yeah.
We have a situation in North Kingstown where something like this is brought back to back. We have a solar panel farm that has been given authorization to proceed. However, the solar panels are great. They certainly beat burning coal or even natural gas. But it also means hundreds of trees are going to have to go, which means loss of habitat, loss of carbon trapping, loss of their ability to take care of heavy rains. What do you do?
I think we have to really change the economics. I'm not sure how we do that, but the economics has to be those solar panels need to be on brownfields. They need to be in places where we're doing redevelopment. I know it's cheaper. You go to a forest, buy a cheap forest plot, cut down the trees, put your solar panels up. That's the cheap way to do it. We have to find ways to incentivize not doing that, and I know that the Audubon Society of Rhode Island has worked hard on bills to try to not let that happen. and get those solar farms to move to brownfields and into our redevelopment areas. That's where it needs to be. Yes.
Excuse me, could you please give a clear definition of brownfield so that it's easier to, I can imagine what you probably mean, but...
So a place that has already been developed that you could then redevelop versus going to a forest or a meadow that is a green field.
For instance, are you talking about solar panels over a capped landfill, or are you talking about solar panels over a now defunct XYZ?
Solar panels that could be on any rooftop, solar panels that could be over a parking lot structure, that could already be over areas that it's already paved, so you've already lost the habitat. Why not put solar panels above that and put the cars below or whatever you need to go below there? We've got lots. I mean, you fly into any city, you fly over all these rooftops, and I look down, and I'm just like, what an opportunity, right, to gather all this sun's energy on all these rooftops. And I know that there can be challenges and economies of scale. It's easier to put a lot of solar panels in one place and gather the energy that way than distributing it across a number of different rooftops or other areas. But I think when you asked for the definition of brownfield, I think that's what I'm driving at. Now, you did talk about some reclamation sites like a landfill that's been capped. There's opportunities there for the solar farm, but there might be other opportunities for other kinds of better habitat management, meadow management that might be better suited for those sites. And so that is a brownfield, but I might give that the opportunity to be restored to a green field. But I would really try to move the industrial solar field into an already existing brownfield that is not really suitable for restoration. Yes.
Along with planting native plants, invasive plants are a countermeasure to that. That if you go along the sides of the roads, you see Japanese knotweed, multi-floor roads, bittersweet. Are there initiatives to get rid of those plants, or at least to keep them under control?
There's certainly plenty of initiatives, and certainly many landowners will work hard to remove those, whether it's state lands or when I think about the land trust that I've been involved with, have worked hard. It's really expensive, it's incredibly labor intensive, and sometimes you have to question how much is it worth, especially if it's like on a roadside. As it gets deeper into a more natural community, I think that's where the real value is in keeping it out of those areas. But I think our roadways, that's just where invasive weedy organisms are going to move, and they're just basically sacrifice zones. Now, but even though some of those invasives, while not nearly the quality of native plants, they still can provide some habitat and some structure for some organisms. It's not ideal, but it's better than just being nothing. But I know from migratory birds, where I study them, when they have the opportunity to eat native berries, when they are fatter and they are carrying more weight when they migrate. And the ones that land on the sites where I study, where it's full of invasives, these birds are not carrying a lot of weight. They don't gain weight during the mornings while I'm banding the birds and trying to look at their weight over the course of the morning. They're foraging, but it's not good food, and it's not going to serve them well on their southward journey. So native plants are key, and I think along our roadways we're going to find that's a hard battle to win. Great questions. Very knowledgeable crowd here. Well,
Can we talk about salt marshes
Sure.
real quick? I've done a lot of things. I did mosquito control here in Rhode Island for 15 years back in the
so wait a minute.
in the
You
90s.
just tell us not to use pesticides, and now you're telling us you were spraying all our wetlands with pesticides. Is that what you're telling me?
I absolutely am. It's called growing up.
Okay.
Yeah, I quit mosquito control because I got tired of killing things, in all honesty. But for example, looking at Sepauwett Marsh in Tiverton, or say down towards Galley, most of the salt marshes I worked in, there was a fairly clear divide between the marsh itself and the upland. There was a rise. And the rate at which that salt marsh could migrate up that valley, as it were, because these are flooded valleys, basically, is what we are, is what all of this is, was very slow. So even if it wasn't hardened, if you jumped the level of seawater, or bay water, as it were, you weren't going to be able to get, that marsh wasn't going to be able to move very far inland over most of its edge. So I guess my question is, what are your thoughts on where do we find more marshland?
Yeah, I'm not a marsh expert, but those people who are clearly have mapped out the sites that are going to be the best suitable places for marsh migration, and they've already done some of these restoration sites, like over in Middletown by Sachuest Point area. They're doing a lot of work down the Narrow River for a variety of reasons, but that's another site where we can get some good restoration. But as far as marsh migration, it's really with the knowledge that you're talking about. Where is the elevation of relief correct? Where is there a backdrop which is native enough or natural enough, and then where can you go in and do the hard work of helping those organisms move up that slope? Yeah, it's not.
Time to also change the soil profile to make a marsh soil out of.
And this is coming at a rate that's faster than what we've seen in the past, so that is going to make it very, very challenging. Yes.
Okay, a comment on coastlines. One of the problems we have nowadays is with all the construction, all the buildings, they need not only cement, they also need sand. The place where we get sand is from the rivers or the coast. So we as humans are penalizing that part of the nature by not letting enough sand wash from the continent into the ocean. And on top of that, we're taking away coastline by using sand. So sand is it's an overlooked problem, but sand is a major component which we use every day. But it's a problem for the kind of environment you're talking about.
Right, and I think that's an aspect of human nature that we don't like things that change. We like things to be static. And when we look at our beaches, we look at our rivers, we look at our deltas, we think of them as being, they're not moving, but they are moving. They're shifting underneath of us. And we have to recognize the dynamic nature of the planet in that geologic sense, and the movement of materials that is so important. And that when we take from that, and we take, well, it's just taking, we think we're just taking sand, but we're actually really mucking up a very important geologic process that takes place right here. Maybe a last question, because we're getting at about an hour. Is that about right? So one more question. Yes.
I'd just like to quickly plug into your optimism. I worked as an ecologist for 35 years in New Zealand, and the New Zealand experience is very much based on political decisions, one of the factors driving it is that it's a very small place in terms of human population, and it is an isolated island far away from everything else, so there aren't a lot of influences coming in from the outside. But the main thing about New Zealand's success in maintaining its natural environment and diminishing the amount of species that are threatened or eliminated is the fact that there is a very strong political commitment at the level of both regional and national government. And Rhode Island is actually a really good example of a state that manages those kind of forces reasonably well compared to other states in this country, but we all are under the difficulty of having so many people and so many conflicting interests, and particularly so much economic push for making decisions that are very often very much contrary to the needs of natural populations. So whether we can continue to improve on the political situation and point of view of the environment in Rhode Island depends on gradually shifting that value system where we get people in sessions like this, get more people aware of the importance of doing what we can to introduce those protections and getting the political mandate to make it happen.
That's a great point. One of the things that we certainly know is that when people live on islands, they have an island sense. They feel that entity, right? And I think Rhode Islanders don't usually travel very far. We kind of have that very home sense, right? And I think what you're hitting on is this idea of common interest, right? The winds of political change will come and go, but our common interest and what we care about is what will win the day as we try to find that common ground, thinking about our home, thinking about our place, and what we want to see have happen and what we want to see for future generations when they think about North Kingstown. What does that look like? What kind of other living organisms are here? I think that's the message the conversation we have to keep having, but we have to keep working on what can we do, right? So thank you for that. That's a great way, I think, to end our conversation. So thank you for that. And thank you all for coming. Thank you very much.
So that was great. Thank you very much, Jim. Are you okay sharing your slides? We'll
Yes,
put it up.
yeah.
We'll put the slide deck up on the Climate Conversations Rhode Island website and let you know. My name is Meg Kerr, and with several of my colleagues, we've helped organize these workshops and the photo exhibit with the library. And I wanted to let you know that there's a fun thing that you can do. I find the whole climate topic it's heavy, it's hard. And the West Passage Brewery is going to have climate change trivia on October 16th at 6:30 p.m. So people who've come to these lectures will have an advantage in the trivia because you've been educated. So come join us and raise a beer and have a little fun even though it's a tough topic. I also wanted to say that we are a group of citizens here in North Kingstown that are concerned about climate change. The clipboards, people have been reaching some of you as you came into the room. If you want to stay in touch with us, to stay in touch with you as we figure out what comes next. If there are other lectures you might be interested in, other actions you'd like to see us take together, add your name and an email to the clipboard list so we can get back in touch with you. The last thing is, I apologize that not everybody understood you have to register for each one of these lectures individually. We have heard that the one next week, which is on keeping history above water, is fully subscribed and sold out, but you could get on the waiting list. We know a bunch of people didn't show up tonight. And the last one, which is all about what you can do in your own home, I guess there's 3 seats left, so go home and sign up for it. And that's all. Thank you very much for coming. And thank you, Jim.